Okay. Now, we had talked about Coase theorem and we had stopped there in the last lecture. Now, there is one small diagram I just want to touch because efficient provision, optimal production, and pricing, and how to finance it. These are the core issues we'll be dealing with when a public good comes, right? Now, remember, this is first, if you remember, when I started this topic of externalities, it is a partial equilibrium approach. So, in the partial equilibrium, just to give an essence of what to do with production when a public good is involved, we have a small figure. So, there are multiple straight lines, and the picture is quite neat. Now, what I am trying to do, it is very simple. Remember, the example I started, that flyover. Who is going to pay for it? The people of the town will say it is the cars who are using the highway. They are responsible. They should pay. And those flying by that particular path, they say, okay, I have just used it for 7 minutes. You people are the people of town who stay here. Now, this is a part of a negotiation of what that will be solved later. But the idea is everyone wants to pass the buck. As long as it is a private property, I'm ready to invest, I'm ready to take care, I'm ready to maintain. Public property, I don't have money for that. I will also, in some direct or indirect form, my tax pay, why should I pay for it? And exactly that's the behavior, human behavior that you'll find. And we call it, as I said earlier, free riding. Now, suppose we're talking about a particular public park, a park which is in your locality. Anyone can access, anyone can use. Okay, no, the non-rival, non-exclusive. Now, there are two type of people: people with very young kids and people who have quite grown-up kids studying in IIT. So those people who are there with very young kids, they want the kids to take to the park in the evening. So they have a stronger, or not stronger, I will say a higher willingness to pay for a service like a park. On the other hand, those who are busy people but they have grown up kids studying elsewhere, they would also like the park to be there for beautification purpose and all other stuff. Even maybe on the weekend I can go for a walk. But their demand are lower. And that is why you can see there are two demand curves, D1 and D2. So what will be the aggregate demand for this park? This is what we call particle addition of these two willingness to pay curves. It is exactly similar to the production possibility frontier for the Ricardo model in international trade, the world production possibility frontier. You add up vertically. Same. Remember why I'm adding up? It's non-rival. If you're having it, I can also have it. That is why this adding up is coming. So now you consider an aggregate demand curve given by EGKH. which is nothing but the addition, vertical addendum of D1 and D. Fine. Now, the question is, how much will it be provided? Suppose the marginal cost for creating this garden is 50. So MC equal to 5. Then there is no problem. Some 150 units, and you can think of square feet. So 150 square feet or 150 square meters. So with that much money which you can collect, so given the aggregate demand curve of EGH in front of you, and with marginal cost of creating the garden is 50. So quantity of public goods in units. So let's call it, we're talking about the park, so call it the unit is square meter. So 150 square meters of public park can be created. Now look, had there been only type 1 people, then much lower quantity would have been provided. Now the question, suppose the marginal cost is 240. Even then, 30 square meters of garden will be. What if the marginal cost is 400? No public good will be provided. So it is this partial equilibrium structure in which we are still stuck in. This is, and this is the last part of partial equilibrium, because this is the last slide. Because from today onwards, we'll shift into a more general equilibrium, from partial to general sort of an approach. Now, this is completely a supply side phenomenon. Why? I know there are multiple types of people having different types of willingness to pay, and at the same time, because it's non-rival, I can add up their willingness to get an aggregate demand sort of thing, or aggregate willingness to pay. Now it's completely on the supply side or the cost side, which decides how much public good will be provided. Now, this is a picture which I will relate maybe 10 lectures back later. The results will be completely different when we bring in the general equilibrium approach. Because you cannot say, okay, because the marginal cost of production is so high and we do not provide any public good. How come? And there is a very simple way. Just put a donation box in front of the public park, try to gather as much as money as possible, and something will be provided. But the question again comes back, even if I put a donation box in front of the public park, people will think everyone else is paying. Why should I? Let's free ride. So in the partial equilibrium, free riding and only the supply side part might lead to absolutely no provision of public good at all. So this is the problem with partial equilibrium, but still you have a visual sort of idea about how public goods can be provided depending on the demand for it and the cost of production. So it's a very simple partial. So If there are any question from it, please go ahead. As I mentioned, initial few lectures, I don't mind being. Please go ahead if you have any question. Else we'll move on to something. Abhinav, are you trying to say something? Because you're not audible. Am I audible? I guess so.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir, you are audible.
Sir.
Yeah. I think Abhinav is trying to say something. You can write it because if you're not audible, you can always text in the chat box.
Sir, why is slope of EG different?
Pardon?
Why is the slope of EG different?
Which one? EG.
Yes.
We're adding it up. So for the first unit, you are adding up 100 and 200. This is a vertical addendum. It would not have been the case if the thing was rival in region. Then it will be a lateral shift. Look, what is the difference between D1 and D2? The maximum amount that type 1 will demand will be 100. On the other hand, so till 100, how much type 1 and type 2 are willing to pay together? You are paying for the same thing. And why you are paying for the same thing? And why should I get, suppose I am a supplier, I'm the government, I'm the municipality. I can collect actually 300 for the first unit, 240 for 30 units. Why? Because it's a public park. The moment I collect, say 70 from you and 170 from type 2, I am able to provide 30 square meters of public park, which both type 1 type 2 will enjoy together. There is no rivalry in consumption. And that is why this vertical addendum is coming out. So the aggregate demand curve is EG. That portion is D1 plus D2. But after 100 units, there is no demand for public good by the type 1. So that's why GH coincides from G to H with D2. Clear?
Yes, I understood.
Any other question?
Sir, can you like just once more repeat that what was D1 and D2 like what was
Two types
demand curve in
of
specific?
demand curve. Suppose I have uh, the demand for the willingness. What is the demand? Remember, I started with that. What is the demand curve? It's my maximum willingness to pay. So for the public park, my willingness to pay might differ from yours. So I'm assuming there are two types.
Okay, sir. Yeah, got it.
Any other question from this particular picture? Okay, there is a question I received from Sarthak. Sarthak wrote a question, let me discuss it. So, sir, if my friend bought a subscription of an OTT platform and I use this subscription without paying him, so can I consider it as free ride? Look, this is an arrangement where you are getting something for free. Absolutely so. But shall I call it free riding in the truest sense of the word free riding? I will not, because it is an arrangement between two individuals. You might be, suppose, this is a very common thing. I have a subscription of Hotstar, you have a subscription for say Sony Live, and we share. So basically, that subscription that you have used for free is a donation from your friend or a gift from your friend with an arrangement. You're not doing, and take strictly speaking, that might be illegal as well. We are not going into that domain. We will not venture into that domain. But you and your friend are behaving as a unit to purchase that subscription. But take for example, uh, uh, suppose there is 100 user Netflix subscription, and the price that has to be paid is equivalent of 50 users. Now in the hostel, everyone wants to have a Netflix connection and having this 100. How to, who, which 50 is going to pay? And you said, okay, I don't need the Netflix. Get it if you want. And then some 50 people who actually are sitting on D2. You are on D1. Those people sitting on D2, they purchase that Netflix. You free rate. So hope I could clarify your questions, Arthur. Okay, then let's move on to the next part. So let me stop sharing.
Sir, I had just one doubt.
Perfect. Please go ahead.
Sir, is on-street parking also an example of free riding?
Which one?
Like on-street parking, like there
No,
are.
no. If the parking is free, suppose you go to Kolkata, it is hardly will find free parking. You are free to park anywhere. People will come and charge you parking. But suppose it's a stretch of road, empty stretch of road. You have just parked it there, and there is no sign. You are not eating up. You cannot park on the road, right? We always park on the side of it. If you park on the road, that's illegal. Police can come and tow your car. I am not into the legality part. I'm least into the legality part. Suppose on the side of the road there is space, you park your car. If there is a fee, you charge. If there is nothing, you go on. That's not free riding. That's basically common pool resource use or use of common property, use of public property. If the government wants to take a tax, it will. If it wants to provide it free, it will provide it free. Street light. If you are walking, you are not paying any road tax, right? You pay road tax only if you have a vehicle. If you are walking or using a bicycle, you are not paying any tax. So it's a service provided by the road, the street light, everything. It's a public good. Government made it free for you. It's not free riding. Free riding is a concept where you want to enjoy the benefit of something without taking the or without paying anything for it. Because you know there are people who will somehow pay for it. Okay.
Yes, sir. So, but just a follow-up question, like, so, but I mean, like, suppose in my locality, like, people are doing a lot of on-street parking. It also eats up a lot of road space, and it
Look,
might have some externalities as well.
Ankit, as I say, parking a car on the road is illegal. The police should take the car and tow it. They are not doing their duty. That's the difference. It's a political and legal part. This our course is not focused.
Okay, sir.
Economically speaking, if you want to park a car somewhere, legally you should not park it. Legally you not should. You could not. You cannot. Legally you cannot park it on the road. You can park on designated places or completely empty places. Certain designated places are there which are free. So it's a service provided free by the government. Maybe first come, first serve. Or it is a service for which you have to pay a parking fee. But you can, on the side of a highway, it's a very frequent thing we do. We just come down from the highway, park it somewhere on the left, stretch our legs a few minutes, and then again keep on driving. Again, that's a public good which has been provided free by the government. That's not free riding. Free riding will be getting a parking spot where some people are paying for it. You are taking the advantage of it without paying. Okay.
सर
Yes, sir. Got it, sir.
Thank you.
सर
So yeah. Yes.
सर फ्री राइडिंग सिर्फ पब्लिक गुड्स के लिए यूज किया जा सकता है क्या?
Uh, Technically speaking, for a private good, you cannot free ride, right?
So
What
that
is
would be illegal.
that will be technically impossible. Taking a bite from your friend's burger is a personal arrangement. But by the definition of a private good, if your friend has bought the burger, it's his burger. If he's allowing a part of it, that's a different thing. Again, that's a gift.
So, am I audible?
Yes, Neha.
So if when someone goes to an hotel and use, then some people take the things there, and so won't it be considered as a private free riding?
Which one?
If
Can you give
if
me example?
pardon?
Can you give me? You're taking what inside a hotel?
From a hotel, some people take all the simple small things that are present.
No, 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 no,
Uh,
no. Absolutely, absolutely. There can be two ways to answer it. Suppose you're taking a towel away from a home. That is theft. But if you're taking a small shampoo which is being provided in the toiletries, that's not theft. That is yours because the charge the hotel is taking is inclusive of those services. depending on the thing that you're taking away. If you take out the television, it's a theft.
Okay, sir.
If the toiletries, it's part of your package. You're free to take it because no one is going to use the half-used shampoo that you have used. Your next border is not going to next guest. They will anyway throw it away. Okay.
Yes, sir.
Now, remember when we started our lecture, the structure, when we talked about discussing the structure, we talked about two things. Now, this externality, public goods, the partial equilibrium framework is just to give a snapshot. But the most important two concepts that we'll spend some time from today onwards is efficiency versus equity. Now remember, what was the last slide? Efficient provision of public. In a simple partial equilibrium structure, in the last diagram, if you could remember, there was no deadweight loss. So it was efficient. But now we need to delve deeper into the concept of efficiency. And for that, now I have a request for all of you. There is a particular textbook which I am using, and I'll stick to that. And you can swipe between two textbooks which are given at the end of the slide. One is by Stiglitz, another is by Hendricks. Now, both these textbooks are based on the premise of what we call general equilibrium. Now, what is the difference between general equilibrium and partial equilibrium? Can anyone tell me?
Partial equilibrium is when we take the assumption of ceteris paribus.
Yeah, you don't have to complete it. Yeah, you're bang on time. Full set. So last picture, when I talked about quantity of public goods provided and price of the public goods, there was no other goods. We have assumed everything else in the economy is constant. And Sneha has used this term ceteris paribus, which means everything else remaining constant. In general equilibrium, what we do, for this particular course, we'll use a very simple structure. And the structure is known as the 2 cross 2 cross 2 general equilibrium. Now, the lecture is recorded, so I'm completely on records. Certain courses like international economics, international trade, public finance and policy, these courses should technically come after the course on general equilibrium. You know, there is a course on general equilibrium. But the problem is the amount of general equilibrium which is required to understand this is the bare minimum 2 cross 2 cross 2, which means I'm talking about an economy where there are two consumers, there are two goods which are produced using two different factors of production. It's a very simple thing, if you can relate, is the Heckscher-Ohlin-Samuelson model of goods. Okay. Now, for everyone else who have not done international trade, international trade is going on parallelly, or you have done it?
Yeah,
So we don't
right.
Sir, it
have
will
it
be
in
done in the
this
upcoming semester.
It's again coming, right? It's yet not done.
Yes, sir.
So in the micro two, was there anything on
Sir,
general
it will
equilibrium?
be done in the coming semesters.
For trade, it is there. So is there any particular format of general equilibrium structure or formulation that you have done in any course, micro two maybe? Anyway, not required. Will do. Just look, when I'm talking about two goods in an economy, that you all of you have done. HS20001 is also containing that. The production possibility frontier. Given the resources available in the economy, how much of good one and good two you can produce? Done. So there is no problem in that concept. Now the question is whether you have taken everything together or not. So there is not a problem. If when we start doing it, you will understand. So now there are three core questions on this set of lectures we will deal with efficiency. The first is what is economic efficiency? Second is what are the conditions that make market efficient? Third is why competition leads to efficiency. Now the third question you can relate, all of you. There is no deadweight loss in perfect competition and maximum deadweight loss in monopoly. So the more the system, the market structure leads to perfect competition, higher degrees of efficiency. Now the question is why? And that is why these three questions are very crucial. Now, what do we mean by economic efficiency? As you will see, that economic efficiency is not only deadweight loss. Because so far what we have done, we talked about deadweight loss, we talked about market failure. And we said if there is no deadweight loss, the structure is efficient. But that is only one type of. Categorically, there are three efficiencies. And we'll learn them minutely. Second question is what are the conditions? Now, if you remember the perfect competition, so let me give you the answer first and then derived answer. The answer is MC1 by MC2. So suppose I have two goods which are being produced. So the ratio marginal cost for good one divided by marginal cost of good. What do we call? The marginal rate of technical substitution, MRT. And we have two goods which are to be consumed, two individuals, MU1 by MU2, that is called MRS. And given the two goods, I have a relative price P1 by P. So the condition MRT equal to relative price equal to MRS is the condition of efficiency. We'll derive, don't worry. Why I'm saying it upfront, so that you do not feel that when I say that you start with general equilibrium without studying general equilibrium, you people feel okay, then there is a problem. Basically, you have done some simple structure of general equilibrium, even in the basic micros, HS20001 and micro. But no one told you. So I will be using only those things and add something to it. And then you'll find that the requirement of general equilibrium for this course is met. And there is no problem for it. Now, this condition, MRT equal to P equal to MRS, in itself, again, is not found. What I will do, what is MC1? MC1 is the private marginal cost. Now, in the last set of lectures, we have understood there is something called social marginal cost. So what I will do, and for marginal utility, I know that's the private benefit. And we have also studied about the social benefit. So what we will do, we'll remove externality or internalize externality such that MRT is equal to SMC1 by SMC. MC1 is equal to SMC1, MC2 equal to SMC2, so that MRT is equal to the ratio of the social margin. Either will remove externality or we will internalize externality. And this will happen not only the marginal cost and private marginal and social marginal cost, but also private benefit and social benefit. So when that condition is there, only then we'll say the market. So look, I need to either eliminate externality or internalize it, either in the cost structure through tax or subsidy. Not only that, I have to relate to certain concepts of microeconomics, which you have studied, which is MRT equal to relative price equal to MRS. And if you understand this MRT equal to relative price equal to MRS, nothing but the picture which is being generated under perfectly competitive markets. Which markets? All the markets here. What are all the markets here? From the cost side, if you remember, I talked that there are two factors of production. Let's call them labor and capital. So the labor market is competitive, capital market is competitive, and these two commodity markets are competitive. So when all these four markets are perfectly competitive, you can end up with MRT equal to relative price equal to MRS. Don't worry, we'll derive each other. Now, this is why the question is, if that is the condition, then I can understand that's perfect number in all the markets. The third question is then, why competition? So these are the three questions we need to answer on behalf of understanding efficiency part. Now, before getting into the answering these questions, we need to understand the basis on which we are asking questions. There is a reason we should be asking questions, right? These questions are not ad hoc. There is a reason we ask every question. So, in most industrial economies, this production and distribution of goods, all these lie with the private sector. Why? Because the understanding is, if there exists supernormal profit, new firms will enter. So higher degree of competition will be achieved in each industry. And now, without any intervention from outside, the market will automatically allocate resources in an efficient manner. That's the presumption. Can any one of you tell me what is the basis of this presumption? Where have you learned this? Who have told about this?
Competition leads to efficiency, is it?
That you leave it to the private sector, allocation will be efficient. Where did you learn? Okay, let's not beat around the bush, but let me directly connect the dots. Adam Smith laissez-faire. Remember, it is basically Adam Smith, 1776. He told, leave it to the market. It will take care. No, why? I do not know how Adam Smith actually saw it. But I know that if there are no entry barriers to a particular industry for potential entrant firms, they will try, all the firms in that industry will try to outcompete each other. And in that process, it will lead to almost like what we call near perfect competition, which is efficient. So the question is, if I know that, now how do I know this? Remember why competition leads to efficiency. This is, sorry to say, but I have to use this term. This is nothing but the first fundamental theorem of welfare economics. And the proof is using Brouwer's fixed point theorem. So technically, completely technically, mathematically, all of us can. But all these things were devised much later. So if you ask me how Adam Smith saw it, I don't have an answer. But he did solve it. He did see. So with all these technically upgraded mathematical models and everything, we can see, yes, higher competition leads to higher efficiency. And we can prove it. But how Adam Smith foresaw laissez-faire without knowing Brouwer's fixed point theorem, I don't have an answer. So don't ask me that question. But he saw it somehow. Now, there is a logic in what Smith said. The logic is, take for example, if there is a particular industry where there is one farm, it will behave as monopolist. It will try to extract all the surplus. Now, this is what we call supernormal. The moment you add one more producer there or seller there, it is the farm's behavior, rational behavior, to undercut the opponent. Now, the moment undercutting is done, There is no limit until you reach P equal to MC. Because if you want, can see uh, in micro 2, you have done a little bit of game theory, all of you. I'm asking
It
the
was
HSS,
it was
right?
not covered, sir.
It was not covered. Okay, no problem. So basically, let's do it logically. It's absolutely logical. The technical parts will do as and when required. Uh, Now, look, just logically thinking, it's game theory is nothing but logical deduction. It's nothing else. So logically speaking, uh, suppose there are two farms catering to a particular market, producing the same homogeneous good. So two shops selling the same uh, Maggie, Anda Maggie, both these farms. Can they charge different? First thing first. No, they cannot charge two different prices for the same thing. Why? The person who is charging more will not get any customer. Second, I understand they will be charging the same price, but what will be that price? Their market structure plays a role. They can actually collude. They can collude and behave as a cartel, which is a monopoly with two different firms. So they together will reduce the monopoly output and charge the monopoly price, share the profit. But look, to ensure collusion, you need to have a very, very strong sense of trust or threat. If you deviate from this equilibrium, there will be no further competition or there can be harm. So either a very strong sense of trust among these two or a very strong threat so that none of deviate from this cartel. If it's a Mexican drug cartel, if you move away from the cartel, you'll be shot down. Simple. But it's two Maggie shops, then obviously if you cheat me by charging a price less than the cartel monopoly price, there will be no further competition. Hence, either due to threat or due to trust, you have to maintain the cartel. But you can understand this is quite difficult. Non-cooperation is more easier solution rather than cartel. And particularly if you are talking about certain markets, legal markets. So I'm not talking about drug markets. I'm talking about legalized markets. Whether you are in US or in India, there are laws against it. There are institutions against it. Take for example, there is Competition Council of India. In US, you call it an antitrust law. So there are legal frameworks where competition is basically supported and this collusive behavior is being desisted. So there is a structural support system in favor of competition. So now if they compete, how you cannot charge anything less than the marginal cost. They will be making loss, you will go out of business. But if you charge more than the marginal cost, say P prime, where P is equal to MC and P prime is greater than P, then your opponent can always charge a price P prime minus epsilon and undercut you. So this undercutting continues and converges to marginal cost. So from a game theoretic or reaction function thought of logic, you can understand that if there are multiple farms catering to a particular industry with a homogeneous good, it will be more efficient rather than a particular industry where there are fewer number of farms. Okay, so because fewer numbers means away from the uh, what I could call in general, generically speaking, away from the so more into an oligopolistic structure. So the question that one asks them, if I know that leave it to the market, market will take care, then why do we require a government at all to tax us or subsidize us? Why do we need it? In fact, uh, I'll leave this thing because I have talked about it a little bit. So, so why should government be there at all? Because the first answer you already know. The first answer is there can be externalities and there can be public goods. So if there is a negative externality, it will be overproduced. If there is a positive externality, it will be underproduced. So there is a difference between the market equilibrium and the social. We have done that. Again, for public goods, there will be free riding problem. And if the marginal cost is quite high, then it will not be provided at all. So what Adam Smith in his laissez-faire talked about is about the invisible hand of the market. He said that the government is not an intangible entity. It is nothing but uh, institutional structure run by few people. So they have their own vested private interests. So can these private people actually uh, solve the public interest? Most of the time, it is the public interest which is being sacrificed for the private interest of these individuals running the government. And sometimes it is, even if the government takes a decision which is of public interest, there can be catastrophic results. Because, as simple as speaking, you miss calculate, sort of, you wrongly estimated T1 and T2 in that simple fashion. So it's better if you leave it to individuals. All individuals will maximize his own interest, and all these individuals will add up to the public. So public interest will be maximized. Now, before ending today's lecture, let me tell you that this is something which is at the core of the concept of Nash equilibrium. In a group, if every individual optimizes his or her own interest, the group's interest will be met, except for a certain class of games which we call the prisoner dilemma, where both are losers. So somehow, Adam Smith could foresee a lot of things which we later proved with a lot of complicated math theorems and techniques. So I will stop here and I will share certain slides, all the slides till today, and some slides more today with certain voiceover, which you please have a look before tomorrow's lecture. Okay then. If you have any questions, please go ahead. If you have any questions, please go ahead. Stop the recording so it's able to all of you. Stop recording.